Well, thank you, Connie, and thank you all for coming. The part that is now on my shoulder in this conference is to describe how, from psychoanalysis, the Reich developed into all this orgonomy. So it's a rather tall order, and I have 45 minutes to describe all this. So I'm going to put it in some slideshow and try to walk you through it. Let me first make this. Sorry, this is described in the book of Function of Orgasm. It's about 400 pages book, and I'm going to walk you through this slideshow. I have to go a little bit fast, and hopefully we will be able to describe it. So the title is Evolution of Psychiatric Organ Therapy from Psychoanalysis and its Medical, Psychiatric, and Social Consequences. So it ends up from psychoanalysis to all these different aspects that affects our lives. Orgonomy grew in the womb of psychoanalysis. The founder of psychoanalysis was Sigmund Freud. Reich was a student of Freud, and in the book of Function of Orgasm, Reich praises Freud and says, this is what Reich says about Freud. He says, I spent 14 years of intensive work in and for psychoanalysis. In the end, I was extremely disappointed in Freud. Fortunately, this disappointment did not lead to hatred and rejection. Quite contrary, today I can appreciate Freud's achievement in far better and deeper way than I could in those days of youthful enthusiasm. I am happy to have been his student for such a long time without having to criticize him prematurely and with complete devotion to his cause. As a gift, Freud gave a picture of himself as a remembrance to the Reich, and under it he had inscribed that to Dr. Wilhelm Reich as a kind remembrance from Sigmund Freud, and it's dated 1925. This picture is in the Wilhelm Reich Museum that in Rangeley, Maine, it's on the wall. Now, to talk about how orgonomy developed from psychoanalysis, I'm going to just quickly go over some of the psychoanalytic major theories. Freud developed three major theories throughout his life. The first theory was libido theory, which is the theory of energy. The second theory is topographic theory, or theory of conscious and unconscious. And the third theory, which comes last, was the theory of structural theory, so-called id, ego, superego. Now, libido theory is an hypothetical energy that Freud had to assume, stating that this is an energy that operates in the newborn and is a source of propagation of life, and neurosis develops when this energy is blocked, and instincts get their power from this energy. Topographic theory is the theory of conscious and unconscious, and Freud says that under the conscious mind, there is a larger segment hidden which is unconscious, and it affects our lives. And psychoneurotic symptoms are manifestation of conflict rooted in the unconscious. And Freud postulated that by psychoanalytic technique, when the unconscious becomes conscious, neurotic symptoms should improve. Now, the structural theory, which is the last theory of Freud, divides human psychological structure to three components. Id, which is the segment, is a component that is composed of instinctual strivings. Ego, which is the part which faces the world and negotiates with the world. And superego, which is the internalized social, parental, and religious values which causes approval or disapproval and creates guilt and demands punitive measures. Freud also proposed two types of neurosis. One, he called it stasis neurosis. This he stated that it's caused by disturbance of the sexual life. When there is damming up of the libido energy because of poor sexual life or poor discharge, then this accumulation of the libido energy or energy causes a toxic effect and causes palpitation, hyperventilation, and causes high level of anxiety. And that can be cured by counseling and by helping the patient not to be abstinent. Then he also proposed a second type of neurosis, which say that psychoneurosis, which develops because of an unconscious conflict that needs psychoanalysis to get into the unconscious and resolve the conflict or make the conflict to become conscious. However, Freud agreed that underneath of each psychoneurosis, there is a core of stasis neurosis. And then with each stasis neurosis, there is a component of psychoneurosis. So really there is no need for any differentiation. Each one has a part of the other one. Now, Freud's psychoanalytic technique. Now, how we can go into unconscious and make the unconscious conflicts conscious is the psychoanalysis. In the technique, the Freud proposed that patient lays on the couch and we encourage the patient to talk and free associate and say whatever comes to their mind. And by free association, one thought brings another thought, like the links of a chain, and eventually it leads to the unconscious conflict. And Freud suggested that when unconscious conflict of the neurotic symptoms becomes conscious, then patients should improve. Freud also suggested dream interpretation, because he says that there is some component of unconscious in a symbolic way in the dreams, and by interpretation of the dream, if we can decode the dream, we will be able to help to make the unconscious conscious. According to Freud, when the unconscious conflict becomes conscious, patients should improve. Now this is, Now this is a psychoanalytic setting that the psychoanalyst sits on the top of the couch and the patient lays on the couch. Freud suggested that by laying on the couch, the free association happens more easily. People are able to talk more easily, and the unconscious can be discovered. It facilitates this process. However, psychoanalytic theory and technique does not always work. There's resistances. Patients sometimes don't free associate, they talk about other things, and this process gets halted in the middle. Or even when the unconscious conflicts becomes conscious, not always patient improves. In other words, patient cognitively, intellectually understands why he's feeling miserable, but he still feels miserable, and things does not improve. So then Reich was following Freud and Freud's technique, working for Freud, and realized that some patients do not get better when the unconscious is becoming conscious. He gives two examples. Reich gives two examples of the many cases that he had seen. One was a student that Freud referred him, and he was suffering from obsessive thoughts, constantly was counting figures and whatever, and Reich followed exact suggestions of Freud and did the analysis as Freud suggested, and patient then had some incest fantasy breakthrough, and after that patient was able to have a healthier sexual life, able to have a gratifying sexual relation, and symptoms improved, and he got better, and he left. So this was proving that Freud's theory and technique is correct, this one case. But then there was another case that concomitantly, parallel with this case, Reich was analyzing. And I am going to read this case because it's an important case. This case, I'm going to read it because it will illustrate what we want to say and how Reich started to digress from Freud and other theories later on developed. Reich was analyzing a waiter who was totally incapable of having an erection. During the third year of psychoanalysis, Reich says, we arrived at a perfect reconstruction of primal sin. It means that the sin that caused the trauma to the patient. He was 2 years old when this occurred. His mother gave birth to a child, and from the adjacent room, he had been able to observe every detail of the delivery. The impression of a large bloody hole between the mother's leg became firmly ingrained in his mind. On a conscious level, there remained only the sensation of emptiness in his own genitals. Based on psychoanalytic knowledge of that time, Reich says, I merely connected his inability to have erection to his severely traumatic impression of castrated female genitalia. This analysis was no doubt correct. At that time, I incorrectly assessed the total personality of my patient. He was a very quiet, well-mannered, well-behaved person and did everything that he was asked of him. In a course of 3 years of treatment, he never once became angry or exercised criticism. Thus, according to prevailing thought, he was fully integrated, adjusted character with only one acute symptom, monosymptomatic neurosis. Reich presented this case to the older analyst, and he was praised for his precise analytical work, and they considered the analysis to be successful. However, Reich wondered that if the treatment had in fact been successful, then why had the patient not improved? It did not occur to any of us, he says, that it was precisely this emotional tranquility and unshakable calmness which formed the pathological characterological basis to which erectile impotence could be maintained. I terminated the analysis several months later, and the patient had not been cured. Reich stated that the patient accepted the termination of treatment as he accepted everything in his life with politeness, placidity, and passivity. So this case, from here on, Reich moved into character analysis as a symptom analysis. He realized that the sickness was the patient's character, that they thought that it was an asset. In fact, that was what was preventing him from getting better. So he moved from the symptom analysis to character analysis. In other words, Reich started to say that it is not important what patient is saying. It is important how he is saying it. If the character is in place, intact, then even if patient goes into the unconscious and finds the reason for unconscious problem, discovers it, because the character structure is the way it always has been, then the patient will only understand it intellectually, and there will be no major change in the patient. So the first case reflected correctness of Freud. The second case caused that he realizes that this technique does not always work, Freud's technique. Hence, Freud developed two major theories, theory of armoring and theory of orgasm. These theories both develop parallel, and at the end, gradually they become part of each other. In other words, armoring of the body, the character armoring, prevents the flow of energy and prevents the possibility of orgastic potency. So they become integrated with each other. Now, the theory of armoring developed in the process of Reich's work for psychoanalytic society, in the process of patients' resistance to treatment, because the treatment was not progressing. Sometimes it was working, but sometimes the patients were resisting, and he found that the character of the patient is what blocks that process. Reich discovered that the patient's whole character resists the process of psychoanalysis. It resists the change, like that aforementioned waiter that was able to find the unconscious reason, but he was still same. Well, Reich discovered that to bring a fundamental and meaningful improvement to the patient, the character resistance should be dissolved first. He developed a technique for character analysis to break that character resistance and bring the movement of the feelings. So he defined the character armor, or he named it character armor. He defined character armor as the sum total of character attitudes which an individual develops as a defense against his emotional excitements, resulting in rigidity of the body and a lack of genuine emotional contact. So he is moving away from Freud by not doing symptom analysis, but doing character analysis first. In other words, it was important how the patient is saying things. Although he is moving away from Freud, but it is still in the realm of psychology. He's still talking with the patient when he is doing character analysis. However, the character of the patient has a physical counterpart. Character armor has a physical and muscular counterpart, which is functionally identical, but works in the physical realm. In other words, a patient who is, let's say, has learned the character is that talks, but he smiles a lot, the muscles then here become contracted and develop some muscular rigidity. Or a person who is constantly defensive and keeps the neck uptight and stiff, there is a muscular contraction there. And as time goes on, that muscular contractions becomes part of the person and becomes chronic and is always there. So the character armor has a physical counterpart. Reich gives an example of a muscular and physical armor in the book of Function of Orgasm, and he gives an example that I will read it for you. He says, I treated a man who offered a considerable resistance. Thank you very much. Thank you. He says that I treated a man who offered a considerable resistance to the uncovering of his passive homosexual fantasies. This resistance was overtly expressed in the extreme stiffness in his throat and neck, like stiff neck. A concentrated attack on his defense finally caused him to yield, though in an alarming way. For 3 days, he was shaken by acute manifestation of vegetative shock. The pallor of his face changed rapidly from white to yellow to blue. His skin was spotted and mottled. He experienced violent pains in the neck and back of the head. His heartbeat was rapid and pounding, and he had diarrhea. Felt tired and seemed to have lost control. I was uneasy. True, I had often seen similar symptoms, but never in such a violent form. Something had happened here that, while somehow a legitimate part of the work, was not immediately intelligible. Affects or emotions had broken through somatically, physically, after the patient had relinquished his attitude of psychic defense. Apparently, the stiff neck, which emphasized austere masculinity, had bound vegetative energies, biosexual energy, which now broke loose in an uncontrollable and chaotic manner. A person with an ordered sexual economy, healthy and natural sexual function, is not capable of such reaction. Only continuous inhibition of damming up of biological energy can produce it. The musculature has served the function of inhibition. When the neck muscle relaxed, powerful impulses, as if unleashed from a taut coil, had broken through. So from here on, he is moving into muscular realm. He is moving from the psychology into the body. Emotional armor and physical armor are counterpart of each other and functionally are identical with each other. One in realm of psyche, the other one in the realm of body. But as you see, he's moving away from Freud more and more. He's going into a physical condition and body. Now, this is a schematic depiction of how we see in the orgonomy the relation between body and psyche. This is a source of biological energy and psychosomatic identity, but here it divides. One goes to the physical and the other on psyche. But in the depth, they are both related to each other. Dr. Reich developed and described a technique to dissolve the character armor and its counterpart physical armor. Now, he developed a technique to break the character armor, but then now for physical armor, he also developed a technique, and the technique is written in the function of orgasm, character analysis, and also Dr. Herskovich, which was his last student and recently passed away at age 100, had a book by name of Emotional Armoring that he describes that technique in the book too. So armoring hinders the orderly flow of psychosexual energy or organ energy and blocks the feelings and emotions in the body and hinders orgastic potency. This should be dissolved. Therefore, the theory of orgasm and theory of armoring are inseparable from each other and are integral part of each other. Reich says that in the cases that he was able to successfully dissolve the armor and develop healthy sexuality, patients significantly changed, and they changed unexpectedly. So he gives some examples of the changes that happens in the patients, and I'm going to read a bit of that for you. He says, quite spontaneously, patients began to experience the moralistic attitude of the world around them as something alien and peculiar. No matter how tenaciously they might have defended premarital chastity beforehand, now they experience this demand as grotesque. Such demands no longer had any relevance for them. They became indifferent to them. Their attitude toward their work changed. If they had previously worked mechanically, not demonstrating any real interest, now they became discriminating. The change in the sexual sphere was just as pronounced. Patients who had felt no qualms about going to prostitutes became incapable of doing so. Wives who have patiently endured living with unloving husband and had submitted to the sexual act out of marital obligation could no longer do so. They simply refused. They had had enough. So actually, Reich says that when the armor resolves and the sexual potency is restored, people develop the characters that are, he describes it as like Jesus Christ character. Now, the theory of orgasm. We said that Reich had two theories that parallel with each other developed. The other one is the theory of orgasm. How much time do I have left? Do I have? Okay, I'll try my best. Okay, the other theory is the theory of orgasm. This theory corresponds with theory of neurosis of Freud. You remember that Freud said that the theory of neurosis, when the libido energy is blocked, neurotic symptoms happens. So the theory of orgasm also corresponds with the theory of neurosis of the Freud. Reich says that the orgastic impotence is not just one of many symptoms of neurosis, but it is the most significant symptom as well as the cause of neurosis. In other words, he said that every neurotic patient is sexually disturbed, even though contemporary psychiatrists and psychoanalysts that they were working with him, they say that, well, we have patients who are sexually very potent, but they have neurotic problems. That sexual potency or sexual act, when analyzed and probed a little bit, showed that really it's not a genuine one. They had sexual potency, they were capable of doing sex, but either they couldn't reach orgasm, or there were premature ejaculation, or they had all types of strange fantasies that they had to have. So it was not a genuine, healthy orgastic potency. In orgonomy, healthy orgastic potency is defined as person's ability to surrender to the flow of biological energy free of any inhibition or fantasy, and its capacity to discharge completely the dammed up sexual excitation through involuntary pleasurable convulsions. Orgasm theory is rich theory and encompasses concepts of expansion and contraction of living protoplasm and its psychological expression of pleasure and displeasure, as well as its relation to autonomic nervous system. Well, the autonomic nervous system is the nervous system in the body that is responsible to pulsation and is involuntary and is causing expansion and contraction of the body. So you see, we are going from the psychology, which is the most top level, to the character analysis, then to the muscular attitude and body, and then even deeper into the nervous system, into the autonomic nervous system. So you see how basic is the Reich's theories in the psychiatric treatment are. It does not stop on psychology. It goes into the body and bring changes which is much deeper. And therefore, the changes in the patient is much deeper changes. Sexual potency and the process of armoring, both in deeper level, are connected to function of autonomic nervous system, which governs the involuntary process of contraction and expansion of the body by sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous branches. Okay, now that we recognize the physical armoring by contraction of the muscles of the body tissue and its relation to autonomic nervous system, it is logical to conclude that many of these physical illnesses can also arise from the armoring of the body. In other words, I want to show how logically the Reich's theories are progressing, how logically and scientifically it is progressing. Now, if there is a physical armoring, if there is contraction in musculature of the body as a result of armoring, then there must be some changes in the physical domain, in the physical area. Reich, in the book of Cancer Biopathy, used the term of biopathy for such physical conditions. Reich says, now I'm going to read. He says, the term biopathy refers to all disease processes caused by basic dysfunction in the autonomic or vegetative nervous system or life apparatus. Once started, this dysfunction can manifest itself in a variety of symptomatic disease patterns. A biopathy can result in carcinoma or carcinomatous biopathy. Well, we say that when there's a contraction in the muscles for a chronic time, long time, there will bring some changes in the tissues. So it can also cause cancer, but it can just as easily lead to angina pectoris, asthma, cardiovascular hypertension, epilepsy, catatonic or paranoid schizophrenia, anxiety neurosis, multiple sclerosis, chorea and chronic alcoholism, etc. We are still ignorant of the function that determines the direction in which biopathy will develop. In other words, why in someone causes angina pectoris and in someone cancer, we don't know. But it still needs to be understood. Of prime importance to us, however, is the common denominator of all these diseases as disturbance in the natural function of pulsation. which is the autonomic nervous system. Now, if armoring of the organism is such a detrimental thing to our health, if it is such a bad thing, then why it happens? Now, from here on, we are going to sociology, where Mr. Howard will talk later on about how orgonomy then enters into sociology. Armoring happens in the process of child's interaction with his environment. The anti-sexual and authoritarian upbringing of the children, which are prevalent in most cultures, are the main cause of armoring. Schematically, the process of armoring is as follows. So, schematically, this is the drive of the child, and this is the inhibition that is exerted from the word. And initially, the child protests, cries a little bit, throws a temper tantrum, but eventually submits to it. And the part of the drive breaks from the main thing, separates, and then turns against it. So after a while, there is no need for this. Already the child himself does the work. The body itself does the inhibition, or what does the parental values or the word dictates to him to do. In other way, this is the schematically the depiction of it. Many times patients tell me that, doctor, I hated when my father or my mother was doing this to me, but I find myself doing the same thing, and I hated it when they were doing it. So that is this process that breaks and then takes over the word's value, and the armoring happens here, and then the armoring starts to function involuntarily without the patient having control over it. This is depiction of a healthy. As you see, the psychoanalytic theory has a model for the human psychiatric condition. It is id, ego, superego. That's the Freud's last theory. Now, our model for how human structure functions is core, then middle layer, and then periphery. In a healthy organism, when there is no armoring, from the core, the impulses can show itself quite easily without distortion. A person is able to show the love, pleasure, or the anger undistorted if he wants to. Now, this is the depiction of the armored organism. In the armored organism, however, the person is unable to show what initial primary impulse is or drive is. This armor, this is a muscular or physical armor, prevents it, that distorts these feelings to something different. On the surface, the person shows like exaggerated politeness, like that waiter that we talked about, or character traits or reactive work, but inside there is a distorted feelings, secondary drives that might be different from what the original primary impulse is. Once the organism becomes armored, the primary impulse that are natural, rational love, natural sexuality, rational anger, and rational hate becomes distorted, and it can show in a different ways. As I said, from here on, sociological branch of orgonomy starts, which deals with socio-cultural norms that causes armoring. In other words, social institutions now we are dealt with has to change to the way that takes the child's interest and not the child that has to mold to prevailing structure. Reich, in the book of Reich Speaks of Freud, says this, that I want to read it for you. Reich says, the patriarchal authoritarian era of human history has attempted to hold the asocial impulses in check by means of compulsive moralistic prohibitions. It is in this way that civilized man, if he can be indeed be called civilized, developed a psychic structure consisting of 3 layers. On the surface, he wears an artificial mask of self-control, compulsive, insincere politeness, and pseudo-sociality. This mask conceals the 2nd layer, the Freudian unconscious, in which sadism, greed, lewdness, envy, perversions of all kinds, etc., are held in check, without, however, being deprived of the slightest amount of energy. This 2nd layer is the artificial product of sex-negating culture and is usually experienced consciously as a gaping inner emptiness and dissolution. Beneath it, in the depth, natural sociality, sexuality, spontaneous joy in work, and capacity for love exist and operates. This 3rd and deeper layer, which represents the biological core of the human structure, is the unconscious, and it is feared. It is in variance with every aspect of authoritarian education and control. At the same time, it is the only real hope man has, and real hope man has of one day mastering social misery. Oh, I'm sorry, I just cut it the page and I don't have the page, but this is, I think, in function of orgasm. Okay, page 234. Five minutes, okay. Okay. So the biological energy that operates in the human organism in a pulsating manner originates and propagates through the body from autonomic nervous system, autonomic ganglions, and autonomic nervous system. Reich identified same energy, organ energy, in the atmosphere and tried to harvest it by different devices and used it medically. From here on, biophysical branch of orgonomy develops. This is depiction of the model that how autonomic nervous system operates in the human body. This is the core and the ganglia, which is mostly prevalent in the hypogastric area, in the solar plexus, and by pulsating, it pulsates and distributes the energy through the nervous system of parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous branches, and it causes expansion and contraction in the body. By the way, the distorted character, that is armored character, when people in the society are, in majority are like that, then causes lots of social problems, which again, Howard will touch base on it. Now, Reich says that the basic theory belonged to Freud, but I furthered it so much that he himself could not recognize it anymore. Okay, now that's done. That's done. So if there is any questions or anything anyone wants to ask. Thank you very much. Thank you.